Well, speaking of losing money and guns, is it
Oh,
time?
Great
We're
transition there.
for what we've gathered here for 15 years ago to celebrate the release of what what do we what is the hyperbole with this movie, champ? We're talking about The Dark Knight, like we said at the top. The Dark Knight released July 2008. My math is correct. 2008 was
mm,
15 years ago. I think I
Yep.
got that nailed down correctly. This is the anniversary week for this movie. What is the hyperbole with this movie? Is it the best superhero movie? Is it the most influential superhero movie? Is it one of the most influential movies of the century? Like, how highly do we talk about The Dark Knight 15 years later? How does it live on?
I think it's all like on like the perspective of people because there's certain people that don't respect like the superhero genre, so they wouldn't even give it like a second look. But coming from me, like I would put it in at least the top 10 of just movies of all time. It is a
Mm,
fantastic movie. It is written so well. And unlike, certain franchises recently, I'm not going to name any names, but they don't just try and rush everything and cram everything into an hour and a half, 2 hour movie. They actually take their time with it. I think the actual runtime is like 2 hours, 39 minutes, something like that.
it's close to that
A
for sure.
hefty amount of time for them to like
It's a
put their
commitment.
story in. It's a commitment. But the cast of the movie is fantastic. The actual like acting in the movie, fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
Story, fantastic. And I feel like I think it's kind of undisputable that Heath Ledger's Joker, out of all the movies, I think he's a top five villain of all time. I don't
Mm.
know if you can put him above, Darth Vader. I think Darth Vader's up there. He's got to be,
yeah.
top
Mhm.
tier. Oh, for sure. But I mean, Heath Ledger's portrayal of the Joker is it rivals, Mark Hamill's, portrayal of the Joker and all those like animated series he does, the voice in the Arkham Knight games. Mark Hamill's Joker is fantastic, but then Heath Ledger just brings in this like new perspective. I mean, actually was so committed to his role and just put in such a performance. I mean, he won an Oscar for it. Let's respect that. I mean, playing a comic book superhero villain and winning an Oscar for your dedication and portrayal. I
Control
think. I
yourself,
mean,
champ. We'll
Whoa,
get to the
whoa,
Joker
whoa.
later. I mean,
my bad, my
Ledger
bad.
is the number one in this movie, but control yourself. We'll get to the Joker. But Sam, 2008, like I mean, me and Champ are all in on these superhero movies. So this movie is like a Mount Rushmore movie for us for what it means for the genre in general and just the quality of this movie. But Sam, as a man of fine taste, one of the finest film critics, the man that got me
I don't
onto
know.
Black Mirror. Once I watched Black Mirror, I was like, okay, yeah, Sam, he knows how to recommend stuff. So to the Dark Knight, like how does this live on? Are we overreacting here saying that this might be one of the more influential movies of the century? And it's a great movie and the quality and all that. But if you just think about too, like what the movie industry has become and these superhero movies and these franchises and just all of this IP, and Dark Knight is kind of the thing that everybody is chasing just in terms of quality, how to do it, how to lay out the story. Like the Dark Knight is the peak of these kind of movies, and these kind of movies are what is dominating movies right now. So are we overhyping it by saying that this is one of the most influential movies of the century?
No, not even close. And I
Mm-hmm.
think one of the biggest reasons that realize it is a DC movie. That is a DC hero. And
Mm.
when you compare that, I don't think it really registers for anyone when you watch that movie that's DC because just of how bad DC and most Marvel movies even now are as well. But it's just the creativity of the world. It's just a whole separate world from DC. I don't even consider it part of like all the other things when you look at like the same
Yeah.
world or anything like that. And it's something that, quite frankly, I don't think can be replicated again. When you hear the stories of what Heath Ledger put those actors through, directors, and it's not in the first movie, but later on, where he's making Maggie Gyllenhaal really uncomfortable, like actually uncomfortable, and that translates
Hmm.
to the movie in the one scene with the knife. It's just there was so many moments in these movies that made it, near it pretty much impossible to replicate. And I think that's why it's a moment in time, because you can try to redo it, but you can't bring the same quality of actors and just a vision mind. It's everything hit perfectly. It's kind of like the joke, when you dab up your friend and it's the perfect hit. You can only do that, once or twice in your life. And that's what this trilogy was, and just the wide ranging of stories. It wasn't formulaic. The genius that was put into the story is into the whole series, but especially the first movie is something that we kind of the closest thing was, like Champ was mentioning, those video games, Arkham Knight video games. Those were really fun to play, and
Hmm.
I reminded me of it. I might have to go and replay them, but it's something that it's just Heath Ledger's way he played Joker. I think is one of the closest true to meaning of just craziness, while genius at the same time, and that on top of other great villains like Bane, and it's just takes the whole series to another level.
Champ, we've had that high five. We've
We
done that.
have
We've had the
we've
perfect
done the
high five.
perfect dap. We've done the perfect dap. After you
Musical
pull the
chairs,
chair out
2016.
from musical chairs, pulling the chair out from underneath some poor little girl thinking she's
Oh
gonna
my
win a game
gosh.
of musical chairs. Remington snags that
Jeez.
game 1-0 in the series.
Clean sweep.
It was a clean sweep for sure.
You have to remember as well too, like this was 2008. I mean, Iron Man came out this same year. So this is the very beginning of this kind of stuff. I mean, there was some other franchisee type sci-fi type things that were big. I mean, The Matrix came out in 99, X-Men 2000, the Spider-Man, Sam Raimi's Spider-Man came out in 2002. So, some of these big IP things were already in the works. But The Dark Knight was releasing the same weekend as Mamma Mia. And a lot of people were saying that Mamma Mia was just going to outperform it in the box office. This was the number one movie of the weekend. Of course, The Dark Knight goes on to pretty much break every box office record, becomes the fourth movie at the time to hit over $1 billion. And it's crazy. That's crazy now because that list now is, I think, 50 plus movies long. So in the last 15 years, over 50 movies have hit $1 billion. And that is this superhero franchisee type boom. But at the time, the movie was one of four movies to go over the $1 billion mark. And
And I'm
Roger
sure
Ebert,
movie tickets were cheaper back then too. So that just says even more.
Yeah.
That
who
just
knows
says
though,
even more.
2008, July? Where are we at in the
2008,
recession?
15 years ago. That's
That is a good
15
point.
years ago. I feel like Marcus Theaters, they really pushed up the ticket price. To get me like a medium slushy, it's like $10. It's kind of
How does the
ridiculous.
housing market affect the slushy market? That's the question, because
Oh my
2008 would have been a
gosh.
bad year if there's correlation. The Big Short will explain the whole thing to you if you want to know about the
Mm.
2008 housing crisis. But Roger Ebert wrote this about The Dark Knight after its release. He wrote, "Something fundamental seems to be happening in the upper realms of comic book movies." He says Spider-Man may have defined the high point of traditional film based on comic books. A movie like Hellboy 2 allows its director free reign for his fantastical visions. But now Iron Man, and even more so, The Dark Knight, moved the genre into deeper waters. They realized, as some of the comic book readers instinctively do, that these stories touch on deep fears, traumas, fantasies, and hopes. And the Batman legend, with its origins in film noir, is the most fruitful one for exploration. So this thing right away, like, just immediately transcended everything of what a superhero movie was supposed to be. And it's crazy because not only was this just the beginning of superhero movies, but the fact that it's the beginning, like we didn't have the other quality of movie to judge it against. Like it's not like we had Winter Soldier already out to be like, okay, this is a superhero movie can be top notch and awesome and like it can be a really great movie, but it's not like this Academy prestige thing. It didn't even have those kind of things competing. I mean, the Spider-Man franchise from a box office standpoint, the Pirates of the Caribbean as well was one of the other four movies that had hit the $1 billion mark. So that franchise was starting to boom as well. But just immediately becomes like this all-time movie. And like you said as well, with these other superhero movies, and I just think honestly, just like any action sci-fi comic book, anything in this sort of vein that's chasing it. I mean, I don't think we've seen anything come close to this. This is still like on top. Like, what's even in the realm of this in superhero movie culture? If we were just putting everything in tiers, like, is there anything else in its tier?
Matt Reeves, the Batman.
Really?
Wow. I haven't
Brave
watched that
shout.
one yet.
Brave shout. I think that it is probably not quite as good as The Dark Knight, but I think it's on that level. I just think that Matt Reeves paints Gotham City perfectly, exactly the way that you kind of imagine it in the comics, always raining. I think it just kind of depicts Batman's first year, a year and a half as Batman really, really well. But there's not much that's on the Dark Knight's realm, and I think we were kind of talking about how it came out in 2008, and like when we're comparing it to like other movies like Spider-Man, but even just looking back in time a little bit more, when you look at like the Michael Keaton Batman movies and the George Clooney Batman movies, what they do in those movies is they bring in the Joker or the Penguin, and it's all about their grand scheme to take over the city. But then what Christopher Nolan does in his series is he actually has other things going on. Like there's the mob that's all struggling to take control of the city and their money. And then you've got in this movie in specific, you've got what the Joker is doing that interacts with them, but it's also on his own level. So Batman's, having to hassle between. You also see kind of the lawyer perspective in this one where, Harvey and Rachel in specific are trying to take down this mob. Commissioner Gordon is doing his police work thing where he's trying to take down this drug pushing mob and like this huge, money syndicate within Gotham. And so like doing that in 2008, when you're like comparing it to Tobey Maguire just fighting the Green Goblin for an hour 45, it's a huge difference, and it really, really does show. I mean, let's look at Christopher Nolan's resume as well as a director. I mean, he's got now, if we're looking past The Dark Knight, we've got the Dark Knight trilogy, we've got Inception, Interstellar, Tenet, now Oppenheimer, which is I hear pretty good. He's
Next
just got
week.
yeah. Dunkirk as well. He's just got a bunch of really, really good movies. And so I think when you're putting a guy like that behind the camera and letting him enact his vision in his own movie, I mean, when you look at like Inception and Tenet in specific, those movies are so trippy and just crazy. And it's like, what does this guy have to be on to come up with like this type of movie and make it work? But then you put that type of mind and you give him a little bit of comic book knowledge and put him behind the camera. And I mean, he depicts Gotham and Batman and becoming Batman just in such a good way. And I think it really does peak in The Dark Knight.
I did really like the point that you brought up, Christopher Nolan, because I did want to bring up some people behind the camera. Because when you look at the people involved with this project, it's like, oh, no, duh, this is a great film series. I mean, Hans Zimmer on the track. I mean, highly regarded as probably the best, movie score guy, making movie
Jonathan
music.
Williams.
And then you look at, the actors that are in this movie, obviously, Christian Bale, Heath Ledger, but, Morgan Freeman was a side character. Cillian Murphy was a side character. Like, he had some stuff to do with it, but he was later in the trilogy. And Jonathan Nolan, Nolan's brother, Christopher Nolan's also helped in the movie, and he's done his own stuff. Person of Interest, It's very underrated show. Westworld is also highly regarded. So just across the board, really, what some of the best in the business, and Michael Caine as well. I know we were going to mention some, but quick fire. There were, I had to look up some lists to see which, what are some movies that other people consider better than this, superhero movies that Rotten Tomatoes has ranked higher. Right now it's 96, not 100. So there are a couple movies that are technically better than it. Quick
Hey, Can
fire.
I
So, oh,
can
oh,
I interrupt
you got
in
something. Yeah.
can I interrupt just before you do that real quick? So I did do some Rotten Tomato
Okay.
research and I came up with there's so this is the 94 club on Rotten Tomatoes. This is
94.
movies that are 90 over 94% critic score and over 94% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes. This is since 1970. Non-documentaries. I mean, documentaries. The hit rate on those is
Yeah.
much higher. When We Were Kings, Pumping Iron. There's just too many great documentaries to get into. But since 1970, the 94 movies on Rotten Tomatoes: Godfather 1 and 2, Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Shout out John Cleese. Aliens 1 and 2. Apocalypse Now, Empire Strikes Back, The Princess Bride, Die Hard, Goodfellas, Good Will Hunting, Schindler's List, Lord of the Rings: Two Towers, The Pianist, The Dark Knight in 2008, and then the most recent 94 movie is the new Top Gun Maverick. So that's only 16 movies since
Wow.
1970 have over an audience score of 94 and a critic score of 94. So the legacy, the prestige that this movie accomplishes, but just the rewatchability, the enjoyment from all of the fans. I don't know, Sam, what is going to possibly compete with The Dark Knight?
I don't know. My list was mostly off of the critics, but
Yeah.
a lot
Yeah.
of those, the audience score wasn't as high. I mean, you start wading into like The Incredibles, Spider Verse, the first one, Black Panther, and then the second Spider Verse, also Endgame, Logan. So those are highly acclaimed movies, but maybe the audience doesn't watch it as many times later. And with Incredibles, it's kind of weird because it's a whole different kind of it feels almost like a different genre.
Yeah.
But and I know Champ wants to get in here, but I did also want to give props for another point you mentioned, that it is a timeless kind of show too. When you look at like Spider-Man, the early like very first movie, and you see the Green Goblin, you're like, okay, this you can tell it's like early 2000s. We're seeing a lot of plastic here, But when you rewatch these movies, they still play really well. They're not really. I mean, there is obviously the Batmobile, which looks great for what they were working with at that time, and it's just they're not trying too much to like. They do show off in subtle ways of technology, but it's not so much that you can really date the movie. And I really like how well it's held so far in the past 15 years.
Into the Spider-Verse that's a tough one. That's a good one. That might be in the A+ tier.
It's up there for sure. I mean, it's got. I still haven't seen the second one yet, but I mean, that first one, that animation is just so good and so like fresh, and just like the storyline of. I mean, we've seen so many Peter Parkers, we've seen Uncle Ben die so many times, and now we're getting into like Miles Morales and his story, and doing it in this type of way with such an amazing soundtrack, amazing animation, and just amazing plot. I think that it's got to be up there for sure.
Sam, were there any other live action ones on there? Because the other two, those were both animated. So Into the Spider-Verse, just off the top, I think one of just straight up the best animated movies of all time. So I think it's the case for it as the best animated superhero movie of all time. Like that list even gets cut down even shorter. So I think it's easy for it to be considered on top. But were there any other live action ones that the critics were really in on?
Yeah, the main live action ones. I mean, there's Black Panther, obviously, which I think there's been some very good arguments made since then that it was the more of the significant of the cultural moment of the movie, and not necessarily the movie itself. It's still a really good movie, but in terms of it's more of what the stuff going around it and what it meant for the industry. And then you also got Avengers Endgame, which I could see again goes to the cultural moment, but at the same time, I mean, I know some people really also enjoyed it. It's that one's definitely I think a lot more based on people's different tastes. There's also Logan, which I never really
Ooh,
went and watched. I think I remember seeing the older Wolverine, but not Logan. And then yeah, I
Worth
think the
it.
only other ones were Iron Man and Superman the movie. the Wait, when was this released? 1978. Yeah, it's got 86 audience score, 94
Was that a
critic.
Christopher Reeves one?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. I think I
Shout
know
out.
which one you're talking about. I want to say that's the one where he catches the airplane going into the like baseball stadium, but that might be Superman too.
and
Yeah.
Iron Man just being the movie that is just like the original MCU movie, the importance of that, you could make that case as well. But one of the ones that was in the 94 club that could be possible. What do we classify the Empire Strikes Back as? Is this in the same sort of vein that the Dark Knight is? Because you don't really think of the Star Wars guys as superheroes, but what the films are, could they be the same kind of movie?
I think it's more like sci-fi, like the Star Wars universe. And I think as iconic of a movie as it is, I mean, if we're talking about just like rewatchability and how it holds up today, I mean, it's just not as, you know, rewatchable. It's a
Mm-hmm.
great movie. Don't get me wrong. I'm a huge Star Wars fan. I love those movies. But I think that if we were like putting that on a ranking where Dark Knight is like the A plus and like the what you're striving to be, even though this movie was released in the 80s, I think it would be like either a B plus A minus type of movie where it's like you can still like I mean I'm not trying to hate. It's been like 40 years almost since it came out, but I mean, you can clearly tell like the Millennium Falcon was a toy when they're like hoisting it up into the air and like flying it and whatever. But it's up there, and I think like we're talking like the Dark Knight would be on like the more like superhero type of level, like the Marvel comics. And Star Wars is a comic as well, but I do feel like that falls more into like the sci-fi type of Star Wars, Star Trek, those type of
Hmm.
movies where it's more like sci-fi.
Yeah, I mean, it was the second one ever made. There's definitely some iconic scenes in there, and obviously Luke training with Yoda. There's just things that in that movie that I think people just had never seen before. It was kind of like the first A New Hope. You're kind of getting the world building, but Empire Strikes Back. You actually like get into the story, actually develop the characters. You have the whole reveal. Oh my goodness, Darth Vader's his dad. So I think there's definitely reasons why, and then not just because of the actual movie itself. Which with the Dark Knight, I think it's just the movie itself is just so good.
I agree. And they did such a good job. Like, I mean, Batman Begins was essentially their A New Hope. They've built their world. They've built, how Bruce Wayne is becoming Batman. They've built Gotham. They've introduced like the different crime syndicates as well as like a different villain. And then they hinted at the Joker at the end of that movie. And then it all comes to a close in, well, not a close, I guess there's more, but it all like comes together even more in the Dark Knight, where it's just they've built on this universe. It's still been going on. Bruce Wayne has been Batman for even longer. And I think that this movie also does just a great job of showing both sides of the mask. They show him being like a billionaire playboy, and they show kind of like Bruce Wayne's everyday lifestyle a bit more. And then as well as, how he's playing Batman. So I think that like hitting both sides of that is really, really fantastic. You don't see that in like a lot of movies. A lot of it's straight into the superhero stuff, and they're not talking a lot about like the secret identity and whatnot. But this movie really touches on all of it.
And if you think about both of those movies too, other great superhero movies like Winter Soldier, just other great action movies in general, Fast Five, John Wick 2, a lot of those are sequels. And sequels, like you're saying, they have that liberty where they don't have to explore any backstory. Like they're just getting right in and going. But I mean, the good ones are still able to craft out a character where if you're just watching the movie, it still makes sense. You don't necessarily need, like, you can have the backstory and understand the character better and do all that stuff if you want to, but to enjoy the movie, like, you can just watch it and have a good time. And we've kind of seen that a little bit in the MCU the last with this, last run of movies that they've had, where it just seems like they're getting bogged down with the beginning of everything, trying to jumpstart the MCU. Like, no, there's no real like story happening here. But this movie is a sequel. It can just start right off. It's just purely story. So I mean, just going through the movie and hitting some of the biggest stuff, like right away, the opening scene, the heist scene, we get the Joker in the clown mask at the street corner. They rob the mob bank.